This week's focus is hearing impairments. This week we have activities and cases to illustrate the lives and experiences of those who are deaf and hard of hearing. First, we have the TEDx talk with Rachel Kolb to learn about her experiences growing up deaf, followed by being hard of hearing once she had a hearing aid, cochlear implant, and 18 years of speech therapy. We'll watch a brief, soundless film about Gallaudet University and a second film with a profile of their football team. Gallaudet is the only college in the country for people who are deaf. And finally, we'll read the words of Andrew Solomon from his interviews with individuals who are deaf and hard of hearing and their families. Our goals for this week are to describe and define hearing impairments, identify the experiences of young people who are deaf and have hearing impairments, discuss the causes of hearing impairments, and discuss hot topics in the civil rights of children and youth with hearing impairments, especially as seen through deaf culture. What is deafness? What is hearing loss? The IDEA defines deafness as a hearing impairment that is so severe that the student is impaired in processing linguistic information through hearing, with or without amplification, that adversely affects a student's educational performance. Hearing loss can be unilateral, which means it's loss in one ear, or bilateral, loss in both ears. Now, congenital deafness is a rare condition. 90% of deaf children are born to hearing parents, and yet only 10% of hearing parents learn American Sign Language. There are three basic types of hearing loss. Conductive hearing loss is caused by problems in the outer and/or middle ear. This type of hearing loss may be permanent or temporary. It can oftentimes be medically or surgically corrected. Sensory neural hearing loss is caused by problems in the cochlea and/or inner ear. This is a permanent type of hearing loss that usually cannot be medically or surgically corrected. And then mixed hearing loss is a combination of conductive and sensorineural hearing loss. Here's the scale of hearing loss measured in decibels. It's worth noting that those students who are deaf can really not hear anything. They can feel vibrations if somebody's dancing or if there's a really loud vibrating band playing that's totally plugged in. They can feel the vibrations from that, but typically they just really otherwise cannot hear a thing. And so school in the lives of deaf children includes many communication options for those who cannot hear. There's the oral or aural method, which includes lip reading, and lip reading, as we see in the case of Rachel Kolb, has about 30% accuracy. It's very difficult to do with accuracy. Manual communication includes sign language and finger spelling, and American Sign Language, or if you're abroad, you might have English Sign Language or French Sign Language or Spanish Sign Language, etc. And there's total or simultaneous communication, which is a case in which individuals employ a combination of the above strategies. There are multiple tools for communication for those who are deaf, and the use of multiple tools, oral as well as sign, is typical in the instruction for the deaf students within public inclusive schools. Rachel Kolb's schooling experience began in a preschool for the deaf with a focus on sign language, followed by an inclusive education and hearing school with an interpreter. From there, she continued in the hearing world for her education, ending up at Stanford University. Traditional deaf schools serving deaf students are more likely to rely heavily, if not exclusively, on American Sign Language for instruction. In Chicago, Whitney Young High School houses a premier education for deaf students for those from throughout the city. That is, even though Whitney Young is a selective enrollment high school, its deaf students come from all over. Their education includes a blend of multiple modes of communication, including American Sign Language. Here's a brief history of Gallaudet University and the education of the deaf in the U.S. Gallaudet was founded in 1857 to provide advanced education to the deaf. Abraham Lincoln authorized the college to grant degrees. To this day, Gallaudet University diplomas are signed by the United States President. Gallaudet was named for Reverend Thomas Gallaudet of Connecticut, who became interested in the education of a deaf child who studied in France. American Sign Language is a combination of French Sign Language, sign dialect from Martha's Vineyard, and homespun American signs. So all of the sign languages that pop up around the world in different countries are always going to have those individual quirky components to them based on the way that they emerge. Enter Alexander Graham Bell and the Oralists. Now, Alexander Graham Bell in the 1800s sparked a debate between manualism, or the use of sign language, and oralism, which continues to this day. Of course, he's most famous for his legacy as the inventor of the telephone, the metal detector, and countless other devices. He's less known for his impact on disability and deaf history as the father of oralism in American deaf education. And it turns out that this debate, the debate raging between proponents of oralism, teaching individuals to speak and speech read, and manualism, teaching sign language, in schools of the deaf or in public schools such as Whitney Young, continues. This is the center, this debate is still at the center of deaf education. Alexander Graham Bell's mother, Eliza Bell, was deaf. His father was an orator and the creator of a program called Visual Speech, which used symbols to teach people how to speak languages they'd never heard. So Alexander Graham Bell became interested in oral education for the deaf when he began helping his father's business. Well, he gained fame, power, and wealth from his successful inventions and began promoting oral education as the superior educational option for deaf children. Now, there was some eugenics involved in part of this because he really felt that the high rates of deaf people who were married to each other was increasing the number of deaf children by passing on generational deafness. And he argued that this phenomenon was creating a deaf race. So this was his argument for the development of or the pushing of the oral method, because to sort of keep deaf people apart socially. And that's the social lives of people who are deaf, engaging and enjoying one another's company through the use of sign language is a really strong argument for deaf schools and deaf culture. So Bell is really, despite the eugenic, the abhorrent eugenics he was spouting, also the kind of thing he's promoting is really the elimination of deaf culture, which is quite abhorrent to those who are deaf. What is deaf culture? Well, deaf refers to a culture distinct from deafness, which is considered to be a pathological term. A number of deaf people claim they would not choose to be hearing. Deafness is their culture. Deafness is their world. It triumphs over all. Deaf people who claim a cultural deaf identity compare themselves to members of other ethnic communities. We have a language. We have a culture, they say. Language and culture are the roots. We turn to Andrew Solomon's article on deaf culture in the Lexington Center for the Deaf in Queens, New York, as the basis for our discussions this week.